They were all looking at me. My father raised his wine glass across the table, that same smug glint in his eyes, and said, "Drink, Ethan. This one's special." My hands tensed under the tablecloth. That word. Special. He used the same word on Mom's birthday, when I took one sip and collapsed in the garden. Tonight, it was Thanksgiving, but all I could feel was dread settling into my stomach like wet cement. Hey everyone, thanks for watching HD Reddit Stories. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, if you've ever been in a room where everyone smiled but you could hear the tension humming just beneath the surface, stick around. This story might hit too close to home. Have you ever had to smile at someone who might be trying to destroy you? Because I did. I'm Ethan Caldwell. And on that night I looked my father in the eye, knowing what I was about to do could change everything. "Of course," I replied calmly, lifting the wine glass he handed me. My mother was still in the kitchen bringing out dessert. The rest of the family chatted, laughed, oblivious. But I wasn't listening. My father's eyes were fixed on me, waiting. That same forced warmth, that subtle tension in his voice, like he wanted me to do something, and fast. I dropped my napkin. And as I leaned down to pick it up, I swapped the glass in my hand with the one he had set for himself. Quick. Clean. No one noticed. When I sat back up, I met his eyes and smiled. He smiled back, and took a long sip. I didn't drink. I just watched. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. He laughed with Uncle Paul. Reached for more turkey. And then, mid-sentence, he froze. His hand went to his chest. His lips parted in confusion. "Robert?" my mother cried, rushing from the kitchen. The wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. His body hit the ground before I even moved. That same cold sweat, the trembling, the short breath, I'd felt all of it once. But now it was happening to him. If I hadn't switched the glasses, I don't think I'd be alive to tell this story. They say Thanksgiving is about family, about gratitude. But this one wasn't. This one was about survival. If you want to hear how I uncovered a betrayal buried for decades, and how a son faced a man who tried to erase him, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to HD Reddit Stories. You don't want to miss what happens next. Because they didn't just want my help. They expected my sacrifice. It started on my mother's birthday. That was the first time I felt the world slip out from under my feet, not because of grief, or loss, or some cosmic twist of fate, but because of a wine glass handed to me with the kind of smile that doesn't belong in any family. I remember standing in front of the mirror that morning, adjusting the collar of my dark green dress shirt. It was the one my mother liked most. She once said it brought out the softness in my eyes. I wore it for her, not for anyone else. Especially not for my father. His approval meant as much to me as dust in a locked drawer. But hers was everything. The drive from Seattle to the outskirts of San Francisco was long, but it gave me time to think. To brace myself. To run through the silent checklist of things I shouldn't say, questions I shouldn't ask, and facial expressions I had to rehearse so I wouldn't look like I was dying inside when my father inevitably made one of his backhanded remarks. He always did. When I arrived at the old house, the same wooden two-story I'd grown up in, and then spent years trying to forget, I saw my mother standing at the door. Her silver hair was pulled into a soft bun, and her smile, as always, held warmth that felt like home. "Ethan," she said, arms wide, her lavender perfume surrounding me in a cloud of memories that didn't hurt. I remember hugging her, breathing her in, and, for a brief moment, pretending the rest of the evening would be okay. The backyard was dressed with hanging lanterns and the faint sound of jazz weaving through the air like something magical. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. My father stood near the corner, drink already in hand, the same gray suit he always wore to look the part, as he used to say. His presence was like a drop of ink in water, slowly spreading, staining everything. He didn't greet me when I arrived. He never really did. To him, I was an obligation, a walking bank account, a second chance at success since his own real estate ventures had rotted from the inside out. He'd made bad deals and worse enemies, and somewhere along the line, decided I was his redemption arc, as long as I kept the cash flowing. "Ethan," he finally called, just as I was taking a bite of cake by the buffet. I turned slowly. He approached with a wine glass, red and shimmering in the light. "A drink with your old man," he said, placing it firmly in my hand. "This one's special." That word again. "Thanks," I replied, cautious. I took it, because my mother was watching, and she deserved peace more than I deserved answers. I sipped. It was dry. A little bitter. But nothing seemed off, until it did. It started as a dull throb behind my eyes. Then my legs weakened. The laughter of the party became muffled, like I was underwater. I looked around for my mother, tried to walk toward her, but the garden tilted sideways. My glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the lawn. I hit the ground. The last thing I saw was my father's face. Calm. Watching. When I woke up, it was dark. I was in my old bedroom upstairs, the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead like it had done for decades. My mother was sitting beside me, gripping my hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. "Ethan, are you okay?" she whispered, eyes red. "You scared me. You collapsed outside." "What happened?" My voice felt hollow. "You only had one drink, didn't you?" she asked. Her voice trembled. "Your father said you drank too much, but I know you didn't. I was watching." I nodded slowly. "Just one glass," I croaked. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, standing, she walked to the window. Her back was to me, but her voice reached across the room like a soft warning. "What you described, dizziness, short breath, blacking out, it reminded me of my father." She turned slowly. "He died suddenly. No illnesses. Just collapsed after drinking with friends. Your father was there." I froze. My grandfather. I barely remembered him, but I knew he was healthy. Vibrant. His death was always called a heart attack. Now, doubt crept in like a draft from under the door. "You think?" She hesitated. "I don't know. But something about that night never sat right with me." I left the next day with 1,000 bricks on my chest. On the drive back, I tried to rationalize everything. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe it really was a freak accident. Maybe my father wasn't a monster, just a deeply flawed man who didn't know how to love. But the feeling wouldn't leave. Back in Seattle, I went for a checkup. Blood tests. Heart scans. Everything was normal. No underlying conditions. No genetic issues. Nothing that would explain a sudden blackout. And yet, that glass of wine. That word. Special. I started digging through old family albums. I called Aunt Susan and asked innocent-sounding questions about Grandpa's death. I searched archives, pulled up the original autopsy. "Inconclusive cardiac event," it said. But no toxicology report had been filed. Then came Thanksgiving. My mother called again. Her voice soft. "Will you come home for dinner?" she asked. "Just one evening." I almost said no. But guilt is a strange leash. I said yes. And just like that, I was back at the house. Same driveway. Same porch. Same weight on my chest. This time, though, my eyes were sharper. Every step felt rehearsed, as if I knew something dark would try to happen again. We sat for dinner. Candles flickered. Turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, everything felt orchestrated to look like love. My mother placed her hand over mine under the table, a quiet reassurance. But my eyes were on my father. He raised a glass of red wine. "To family," he said. "To second chances." Then he handed me a drink. "This one's special," he whispered. My hands went cold. But I smiled. He took his seat. I waited until no one was looking. Then I switched the glasses. And for the next 45 minutes I watched. My father's breath hitched. His lips paled. His fingers trembled. And then, like someone hit an invisible switch, he collapsed. Exactly like I did. Exactly like my grandfather. Only this time, I was ready. As chaos erupted, I stood still, heart racing, a silent scream lodged in my throat. When the paramedics arrived, I said nothing. But I took the glass he'd handed me, now half empty, and poured what remained into a vial. A sample. A truth I needed to confirm. My mother and I didn't speak that night. She only looked at me, horrified. Not by what happened, but by the knowledge that we both suspected the same impossible thing, that the man we called husband and father had tried to kill me. Not once, but twice. I drove home like a ghost. The vial sat in my coat pocket, burning like a secret. I found a private lab in San Francisco, somewhere discreet, and handed it to a technician with trembling fingers. "Test it for anything unusual," I said. 3 days, she replied. 3 days. Long enough to lose your mind. When the call finally came, her voice was calm. Professional. "You should come in." She didn't need to say more. The report sat heavy in my hands. One word in bold made my vision blur: barbiturate. A sedative. High concentration. Enough to knock someone out. Maybe even kill them. It wasn't just wine. It was a weapon. I walked out into the San Francisco fog, the weight of the paper in my hand and a storm in my chest. My father had poisoned me. And suddenly, everything fractured. The memories. The childhood beatings. The controlling manipulation. His obsession with my money. The $5 million I made from my startup. No wife. No kids. No one to inherit it but him. It all clicked into place like the cruelest kind of puzzle. He didn't want my money. He wanted me gone. The moment I walked out of the lab clutching that report, the world didn't tilt, it calcified. Everything became sharper, harder, clearer. The city lights of San Francisco blurred into angry streaks through the windshield as I drove with no destination, gripping the wheel like it could hold back the hurricane inside me. I had confirmation. Barbiturate. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was poison. And it had been in my glass. I pulled over near the bay, the paper trembling in my hand as much as I was. The cold wind off the water whipped at my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was replaying every moment I'd ever shared with my father, every clipped sentence, every disappointed sigh, every time he referred to me as an investment, or worse, said nothing at all. All of it now had a new filter. He hadn't just disapproved of me. He'd wanted me dead. And for what? $5 million? No wife. No kids. If something happened to me, everything defaulted to him. I was his insurance policy. His escape plan. His final Hail Mary. I should have gone to the police immediately. I knew that. But something stopped me, something primal. I needed to confront him first. I needed him to look me in the eyes and admit it. Not for revenge. For truth. For closure. For my mother. She had no idea I'd gone to the lab. She still believed it was all too terrible to be real. But I knew better. She had spent decades making excuses for a man who had never once made any for her. And now, she deserved better. We both did. I waited a week. My father had recovered enough to be discharged from the hospital. My mother, gentle as ever, invited me to come visit. "He's still weak, Ethan," she said on the phone. "But he's asking about you." Of course he was. I agreed. I wore the same dark green shirt, symbolic maybe. Or maybe I just wanted my mother to feel something familiar. As I pulled up to the house, the sight of it no longer made me nostalgic. It made me ill. That place wasn't home. It was a stage built on lies, manipulation, and inherited pain. My mother greeted me at the door with a soft smile, but her eyes had changed. There was a weariness there. A quiet waiting. She knew something was wrong, maybe not everything, but enough. "He's in the living room," she said, brushing invisible dust from her apron. I'll get us some tea. I nodded. Thanks, Mom. I walked in. He was sitting in his usual armchair, a blanket across his lap, a book open but unread. A glass of red wine, again, sat on the side table. Of course. Ethan, he said, voice gravelly but composed. Come to see your old man. That's good of you. I didn't respond. I pulled the lab report from my coat pocket and placed it gently on the coffee table. He didn't even look down at first, just raised an eyebrow like I'd brought him a bill. Barbiturate, I said evenly. That's what was in the wine you gave me. On Thanksgiving. Same as the glass I drank on Mom's birthday. He blinked. Then laughed. Are you accusing me of poisoning you now? That's a serious allegation, son. I didn't flinch. I swapped our glasses, Dad. That silenced him. I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. You drank what you poured for me. And you collapsed? I took what was left in your glass and had it tested. I have proof. His hands twitched, his jaw clenched. You're being dramatic. No, I said, standing. You're being criminal. I don't care why you did it, not yet. But I'm giving you a choice. You tell me the truth, or I take this straight to the police. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. He sat still for a moment, eyes narrowing, then slumped forward, elbows on knees, face in his hands. I just wanted to knock you out, he muttered. I froze. I was going to fake a will, he said, not looking at me. I'm in debt, Ethan. You have no idea how bad it is. I thought I could fix it. Just needed your assets transferred. If you were unconscious, I had time. My stomach turned. And if I hadn't woken up? He didn't answer. I could have died, Dad. Still no answer. You tried to kill your own son. Finally, he looked up, and in his eyes I saw not guilt, but emptiness. Like something inside him had long since died, and he was only now realizing what was left. I had no choice, he whispered. There's always a choice. I snapped. And you made the worst one. I turned and walked out. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, but before I opened it, I heard soft footsteps behind me. My mother. She had heard it all. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She didn't speak, just reached out and held on to me like she needed something to stay standing. I didn't let go. We sat in the backyard later, beneath the lantern still faintly strung up from her birthday. The same garden where I'd nearly died. We sat in silence until she finally spoke. My father, she said. He collapsed after a night of drinking. With Robert. Everyone said heart attack. But he was healthy, Ethan. Strong. And after he died, Robert inherited almost everything. The world shifted again. You think he killed Grandpa too? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We went back into the house. To his study. To the old safe he never let her touch. The combination was their wedding date. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, old real estate contracts, dusty folders, and a leather journal. Her father's journal. She flipped through it slowly, like unwrapping a coffin. Then she stopped. One entry, written in rough, trembling cursive. Robert's acting strange. Last night, after a glass of wine, I felt dizzy. Short of breath. I suspect he means me harm. If anything happens to me, investigate. The air left my lungs. We stared at each other in silence. The truth was no longer hiding. It was bleeding out in ink and memory. The next day, I made calls. A lawyer. A private investigator. I reached out to contacts in the tech world. Discreet professionals. People who knew how to dig deep and keep quiet. The investigator, Mr. Harris, was calm and thorough. The lawyer, Anna, was sharp and direct. They read the journal entry, the lab results, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. This is attempted murder, Anna said. Possibly murder, depending on what we find about your grandfather. We got a court order. We exhumed my grandfather's body. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, watching his casket rise from the earth like a ghost pulled back into daylight. My mother cried silently beside me. She hadn't visited his grave in years. Said it hurt too much? The autopsy report came back 2 weeks later. Barbiturate. A slightly older compound. Same effect. Same dosage. Same result. He'd done it before. Now we had a pattern. Then Harris uncovered the inheritance documents from 30 years ago. Several signatures didn't match. Transfer deeds had been altered. The paper trail wasn't just suspicious, it was damning. We put everything together in a file thick enough to crush someone's life. And we were ready. My mother didn't hesitate. "We're taking him to court," she said, voice like ice. "Not just for you. For my father. For every lie he told." I had never seen her that strong. We filed charges. The court date was set. When the day came, the sky was gray and heavy. Rain pattered against the windows of the courthouse as if the world itself wanted to weep. My mother sat beside me in the front row, hands clasped. Across the room, my father looked smaller than ever. Defeated. Hollow. But still defiant. He pled not guilty. But the evidence laid out like dominoes didn't leave much room for denial. The wine glass. The toxicology. The journal entry. The forged documents. The matching poison in both cases. The motive, debt, inheritance, desperation. When Anna cross-examined him, he didn't fight hard. He barely looked up. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Attempted murder, for me. First-degree murder, for my grandfather. He was sentenced to life in prison. No parole. When they led him away, he didn't look at us. Or maybe he couldn't. The moment the doors closed behind him, my mother finally exhaled. Not loudly. Just a soft, broken sound. I reached over and took her hand. It was warm. We'd done it. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel triumph. I thought I would. I thought justice would come with a thunderclap, some internal scream of satisfaction, some final release of everything I had carried for so long. But instead, it came quietly. Like snowfall on a battlefield. My father sat still, eyes forward, unmoving even as the sentence was spoken, life in prison without parole. There was no outburst. No protests of innocence. Not even remorse. Just silence. My mother gripped my hand the moment the gavel struck. Her fingers were cold, but her posture was straighter than I'd seen it in years. She didn't cry. Neither did I. We just sat there, breathing the air of a courtroom where a family had just imploded, and finally, stopped pretending everything was fine. As we stepped outside, rain fell in soft sheets, soaking the concrete, cleaning nothing. There were no reporters. No cameras. My father was once a respected businessman, but time had eroded his power, and the trial had done the rest. What remained of his name would fade into court records and whispers in back offices. We drove back to San Francisco in silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, or a tense one, it was the kind that sits between people who have nothing left to prove to each other. My mother rested her head against the window, watching raindrops chase each other. I kept my eyes on the road, trying not to think of the boy I'd been in that house, and the man I'd become outside of it. In the days that followed, we packed what little was left in the old family home. My mother decided to sell it, said she couldn't stand the echo of his footsteps in the hallway, or the way the wallpaper seemed to hold its breath. She moved in with me, temporarily, she claimed. But months passed. And slowly, a new rhythm settled into place. She began gardening on my apartment's terrace. Lavender, rosemary, tiny cherry tomatoes. The scent filled the air every morning when I stepped outside with my coffee. She found joy in the soil, in nurturing something that bloomed without violence. I, too, found joy in simple things, the clinking of teacups, the rustle of newspapers, the occasional humming from the kitchen. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't. The journal of her father sat in a drawer by the fireplace. Not hidden. Just respected. a relic of a truth we had uncovered together. I returned to work in my own way. No more chasing deals or VC rounds. I began mentoring younger tech founders quietly, privately. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to help someone build something good. Something honest. One afternoon, while we sat under the soft gold of sunset, my mother turned to me. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "how long he planned it?" I didn't answer right away. "I think he planned it when he realized I wouldn't give him a dime more," I said. "When he knew I was no longer afraid of disappointing him." She nodded, eyes on the sky. "He never wanted a son. He wanted a tool. Then he picked the wrong person," I said softly. She smiled, a small, tired thing, but it was real. "Are you okay, Mom?" I asked, watching her. She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, now dirt-streaked from potting soil, her nails short, strong. Hands that had carried a family for too long. "I am now," she said. "Justice was served. My father can rest. And you're safe. That's all I need." I didn't realize I was crying until she reached across and wiped a tear from my cheek. We sat there for a while longer, the scent of lavender between us, the hum of the city below, and the weight of a broken legacy finally beginning to lift. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still wake up gasping, tasting red wine and seeing his smirk. But I also wake to the sound of my mother making tea, to the wind brushing through flowers she planted, to the warmth of knowing I'm not alone. He wanted my life. But in the end, all I took was his freedom. And that was enough. People like to talk about healing as if it's a finish line, something you cross once you've done the right amount of therapy, cried the right number of nights, or faced your past with just the right amount of courage. But healing isn't clean. It isn't neat. And it doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes, it comes in fragments, like the silence between two people who've lost too much to speak. Sometimes, it comes with lavender growing in old soil. I learned that from my mother. There's this idea we grow up believing, that family is sacred, that parents always want what's best for their children, that blood is thicker than betrayal. But it's not. Blood can lie. Blood can manipulate. Blood can wound you deeper than any stranger ever could, and still look you in the eye while doing it. I used to think my father's distance was my fault. That if I was more obedient, more impressive, more successful, he'd see me as a son instead of a failed investment. I pushed myself into exhaustion, trying to earn love from a man who saw emotion as weakness and empathy as a liability. The day I realized he wanted me dead wasn't just the day I almost lost my life. It was the day I stopped blaming myself for his emptiness. If you're reading this, and you've ever questioned your own worth because someone close to you withheld love, let me say this plainly, that's not on you. Their inability to love isn't a reflection of your value. It's a mirror of their own brokenness. I spent years building a life that looked good on the outside. Successful startup. Fancy apartment. Polished social image. But none of that protected me from the rot that came from my own bloodline. And when it came, it didn't knock. It poured itself into a wine glass, smiled, and waited. You know what hurt the most? It wasn't the betrayal. It was the confirmation of everything I had tried not to believe. That maybe, just maybe, the man I feared growing up was exactly who he always was. And maybe I wasn't crazy for feeling like I had to be smaller, quieter, less me. But here's the lesson: truth doesn't just hurt. It liberates. The moment I chose to see the truth for what it was, I stopped being his victim. I became my own defender. My mother's protector. My grandfather's voice. Sometimes justice comes with a sentence. Sometimes it just comes with survival. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want my father to suffer the way he made us suffer. I just needed him to stop. To stop poisoning people, literally and metaphorically. I needed to break the cycle. Not with violence, but with accountability. You may never get an apology from the people who hurt you. I didn't. You may never hear them say, "I was wrong." But you don't need their confession to find your peace. You need your own conviction. The moment I stood in front of him, report in hand, evidence in my pocket, truth in my voice, I knew I wasn't the broken one. He was. And when he was led away in cuffs, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I could finally breathe. Now, when I sit with my mother on the terrace, when I mentor young entrepreneurs without needing anything in return, when I choose silence instead of screaming, I realize healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to live with it. Some scars don't fade, but they remind you where not to bleed again. And sometimes that's enough.